some information on me. I'll just be brief. We can always talk about me some other day, but I'm a psychology professor here at UF, and I started a field sustainability psychology through my doctoral program a few years ago in educational psychology. And one of my principal interests is understanding the role of dignity in the sustainability of inclination, if you will, and also the role of fear and how that affects dignity and our understanding of what our responsibility is, how we perceive responsibility for the social sustainability as well as the environmental sustainability. And and I'll have to mention that I also have an Asian elephant conservation organization that turned 21 this June. So yeah, that's been it's been a lot of work and just a real gift. So that's kind of in short who I am. Let me see, I'll share my screen. Here it is. Cool. Yeah. Okay, let me get to the top. And let's see. Okay, here we go. Push that up there. Okay, good. Now that's out of the way. Can everyone see the slide presentation? The slide itself? Just someone shout out.
Yes, it looks good.
Okay, great, thanks. I'll have to turn the images back on so that I can see you for questions. But yeah, so what Ariel and I talked about most in our initial conversations was the essentiality or the centrality of human dignity in sustainability. And it seemed to be, and you'll see why if it's not already obvious, why that's so important in the context of equity, diversity and inclusion and sustainability. And I'll just move to the next slide here. Oops. I'm sorry, I'm having some technical difficulty. Good, okay. And so this is an acknowledgement that the organization created, and just a reminder, a stark reminder that we are walking on land that wasn't ours to begin with. And so that's probably a centering point at first, would be to acknowledge that, and then, start working toward, obviously, we'd call it an ecological equity. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Told that's me. That's the old cover of my textbook. So the cover looks a lot better than the new one, but no matter. Some of you have seen the textbook, but this is, so again, my research focus, and I mentioned the elephant organization here. Okay, now this is where we'll start getting into the heart of this, and that these are the 7 tenets of the psychology of sustainability. The sustainable psychology, but this in the psychology of it. And so you can read these as well as I can. In case somebody can't see this well, I'll go ahead and read it. It's any solution to a sustainability problem that does not first address factors negatively affecting human dignity will ultimately not be sustainable. As we're going along, you will not be interrupting me at all if you want to stop and have me explain any of these, or if you want to wait and I'll share, we can talk more about them later. But every sustainability problem is first a social problem, therefore a psychological problem. Thinking creates emotion, emotion creates behavior. The future is nothing more or less than the decision today. And that's very much about how can we be agentic in our environment on our behalf and behalf of others. The effective agent for sustainability is first her and his own fear master. How this points to the fear we talked about and so forth. At the heart of all human behavior, the worst, the best, and all points in between is the unconscious or conscious experience of our personal mortality. And any service to the common good that attends to the comprehensive problem, I'll explain that in a minute, and is the portal to our greatest opportunity. That last might be the one that might be the most difficult to conceptualize. And what I mean by this is that I've had some, I'm sure you have too, Bahar, and how you've had this come to you too. People say, well, I'm really interested in this, but I also want to change the world. And I don't see how this that I'm interested in can actually ever do anything to improve, human health and happiness, if you will, the quality of the built environment, the environment in general. And in fact, it does. If they're doing something that benefits the common good through whatever they're doing, no matter what it is, they can be in fisheries or in nursing, doesn't matter what it is. To that extent, it will align with other people doing other things, and it will support directly and indirectly what other people are doing for the common good to resolve the comprehensive problem. And that is our greatest opportunity to grow as a healthier society. So that's what that means. There's a good bit of literature that speaks indirectly to this. That's the thing. There's a lot of literature that needs to be synthesized and translated for sustainability application. Okay. So let's see, Ariel, would you like for me just to define these and then we start the question and answer with these points?
Yes, that would be good.
Okay, gotcha. All right. So why the centrality of human dignity and holistic sustainability? Oh gosh, you know, I should have put up the 5 facets of sustainability model. Hal's seen it, Bahar's seen it, but at any rate, when I was, the two things led to this realization that human dignity must be the pivot point in our efforts for sustainability. Is one was my work in India with my elephant organization. The other was when I was the more recently, which is still some time back, is when I was at USF and I had an appointment in the Water Atlas as a researcher, and I had an appointment in the Graduate School of Architecture, primarily to help them build what we would call here their sustainability in the built environment. It's quite a bit different. It's not as comprehensive, but anyway, that's what I was doing there. And the first time I took a group of students out into the field, we went to the recently organized, sustainable, new urbanism in parts of Tampa. And then we went to the blighted parts of Tampa. And the first thing that I noticed was, one, the blighted parts were inhabitable, but basically, and it was interesting is the really cool, high efficiency buildings that had been built in the new urban area also were not inhabitable by most everyone that lived there 5 years before. And so this what made me think about how sustainability must have at the center of it. And that's why I have trouble with the 3 pillars of sustainability, and I don't think that they represent the heart of the issue, and that's the human dignity. We must attend to the overall well-being of each individual, irrespective of the socioeconomic status. Otherwise, we just simply will not be sustainable. And that's one of the things my research has pointed out time and time again, has what to do about that. Okay, the reciprocal relationship of dignity and pro-social behavior. Again, most of the research on this is not a straight line, but most of it strongly indicates that an individual's personal experience of well-being, so that would be their efficacy, their esteem, their agency, their social capital, that's their sense of self and their society, directly affects, to the extent that they see their responsibility to help others experience that as well. So in other words, to put it simply, an experience of an increased or improved experience of dignity has a relationship with and a commitment to in that individual to see someone else better off. There's a part. Okay, and then gentrification versus sustainable development. I know that everybody in this room looks at sustainable development. And so we can plug back into the centrality of human dignity. Sustainable development is actually where we need to go. How do we make our built environment, the natural areas intersect, for example? How do we bring nature into the built environment and we make it equitable? So we get into this concept of ecological equity. Clean air, clean water, a safe place to live, easy access to work and hospitals and so on and so forth are things that it's incumbent upon us as human beings to make sure that as many human beings as possible share this. Social value orientation, SVO, that's an area of social psychology research that looks at three subtypes or 3 types of orientations. That's cooperative, competitive, and individualistic. And my research with this concept, sustainability inclination, it indicates that someone that has a cooperative social value orientation is more likely, and this is not will, this isn't a guarantee, to have a higher inclination, not necessarily action, and to be inclined to act sustainably. And I'm talking about holistic sustainability. So in other words, seeking to improve the environment for people and not non-human and human animals alike. Competitive and individualistic, which characterizes to a large extent Western society, especially the United States, shows that makes adopting a high sustainability information more difficult. cultural competence and inclusion and sustainability education is something that I've been working with for some time, is to, and this plugs into multiple intelligence theory and the triarchic theory of intelligence, which you don't need to talk too much about here, but they are multiple intelligence theories, probably self-evident in that we have an ecology in the classroom, so the greater diversity is we listen and think and learn and act differently based on how we see ourselves in society and where we come from and where we want to go. And so all these affect how we, if you will, embrace the education around sustainability. And that's where cultural competence comes into that. We'll get to something else later on in I think it's the next slide, but how about some questions here? I know I just tossed out a 1,000 words in a few minutes there, but anything that catches you that you'd like to share your thoughts on?
One of the sections that I would like to share thoughts on, one of it's more of like I guess like a personal story, but with the gentrification versus sustainable development point that you have. My father's side of the family is in Tallahassee, like that's where their bloodline is in Tallahassee. And their area where my family lives is slowly being gentrified, like under the guise of sustainable development, because all of the buildings and new houses going up, they're like technically green buildings, sort of, like they are like the sustainable design, but like it's like sustainable development is happening, but at what cost? Because like my family's being displaced, like they can no longer afford to be there. They can't afford to live where they've lived for centuries. So yeah, I just wanted to make that little statement. Right.
And so when we first started talking about this and about this meeting and this conversation, it caused me to remember, and I don't know if how much of this is happening anymore, Hal and Bahar, you might, I'm sure you do, is that I was really interested back in my USF days in learning more about urban land trusts and how, like I think Seattle was our largest effort there, was freezing property taxes. So, you could have a McMansion next to, a 1910 home that might not be in the greatest of repair, but the man that works and lives in that place, is the guy that walks across the street to the hospital and fixes all the plumbing, And so, and the person that lives next to him was probably the doctor. But anyway, you have, there was an equity that was built into that kept from driving people away simply because they couldn't afford, the property taxes, for example, and some of the other things. So that would be a question for, that I would have for you all is if anybody's following that, what's the status of urban land trusts in the States?
Yeah, I don't personally know, but this issue of sort of green gentrification that Ariel raised is increasingly, on sort of the minds of our students and is of interest from a research topic. So I think it's something that we're, as a program, likely to want to dig deeper into and help the students on that journey to try to uncover the problem and think about some of the strategies we can use to address it. Looks like Dr. Kamal might have a question.
Okay, great. Hello, Dr. Kamal.
Hi, this is, these topics are, can you hear me well? Because I don't have my headset. I'm sorry. And I'm sorry I'm late because I had a class and we just extended because some technical issues with the IT. But this topic is very close to my heart and something that I worked with people who look at this issue. I personally looked at this issue. I'm a very big advocate from within, from outside about the anti-displacement kind of strategies to advocate for that. But I think the mistaking rising market and change in market, which is associated usually with new urbanism, a movement with sustainable urbanism and sustainable buildings. It's a fact, but it's been like that because of the failure of local government people and lack of awareness of some elected officials to address the issue of setting aside affordable housing as they move on with their development plan. We have seen this very, very clear I don't want to mention name, but big politicians who's in HUD. And I came from San Antonio, who had like big presence in the past couple of decades in HUD secretary positions, particularly, who happened to be mayors for the city before. And they all went to the same kind of trap of not addressing affordable housing to be set aside. And in Texas metro areas now, we've seen the consequences of all of this in all metro areas, Houston, Austin, Dallas, in particular, and San Antonio. And there's been kind of a movement of creating affordable housing frameworks and strategic plans and implementation plans now being the hot in the public policy in general, but because of the kind of ignoring this fact in the past. But also Seattle King County have its own problems with setting aside affordable housing, and not only politician issues, because also the public being good recipient of inclusionary zoning is not happening in most of these areas. The state does not allow to set aside affordable housing, but there are other creative tools to go around that, and that what make the process complex and make the people in these positions kind of not being thoughtful enough to include them early in the process. So Ariel, your point is very much in spot, but it's not because of the development driving the market, it's just the people don't make the enough precautions early enough in the process, if that makes any sense.
Thank you, Dr. Kamal. So, okay, how about before we move on from this with this slide, any other thoughts, questions? Oh, and Hal, thank you for, that's great. I mean, if SBE can begin tackling this thing from UF, positive things will get done through the department and through the students. That's really wonderful. Let's see. Anything else before I move on? Of course, it's not the last time you know, once we move the page, doesn't mean we stop talking about this if something comes to mind. So.
Yes, actually,
please.
Dr. Chandler, something that kind of came to mind that I thought was interesting when you were talking about the social value orientation and the sustainability inclination, and talking about the inclination along this sort of continuum of cooperation, competition, and individualism. And it kind of reminded me of some of the things that get discussed in resilience theory and social ecological systems, and how systems sort of, you know, manage change as they kind of are bouncing back and forth between these different sort of more competitive, more cooperative sort of affiliations, and to see that in the social and cultural context and sustainability, that's something that I'd like to explore more in the work that you're doing. It definitely kind of you know, piqued my interest a bit. So
great. Okay, well, I'll look forward to that. Thanks. Okay. I don't know if we have time to get too far into it right now, but perhaps we can talk later, or if we have a little bit of time towards the end, I can go back to it. Okay. Let's see. So let's go social-cultural dimensions, speaking of which, right? Okay, some other areas of interest that I have is the indigenous rights and sovereignty. And we get back to this age-old issue of, by the way, this is an aside, I was really grateful to hear that the city of Asheville has begun working on not just talking about it, but funding reparations. So, you know, even in the South, if I may say, you know, these things can happen. And then, so let's see, Era, you put in reparations for ADOS, and would you tell me about, I didn't see that one.
Yes, reparations for ADOS. So ADOS is an acronym. It stands for American Descendants of Slavery. Yes, and I feel like, yeah, it's okay. I just feel like that's a very important topic to talk about, like how these my ancestors and being a descendant, like we haven't really been paid for all of like the labor that we have done and continue to do. And like there's all different kinds of reparations. There's like slavery reparations, and there's like housing discrimination reparations. So yeah, just like basically being paid for like all the work that we put into building this country.
Well, so you know those words were used in the articles that I read about Asheville, but they didn't use the acronym. So thank you for that. Yeah, it will happen. It just, how do we make it happen sooner than later? Yeah, so environmental racism versus ecological democracy or ecological equity. So democracy works, I think, as well as anything for this, but and I know that you all in the faculty at SBE have worked with environmental racism before, and I had the privilege of working as a capstone, mentor with one student that was interested in that, whose family had experienced that directly. But so and one of the things that I think is important to point out is, I was talking with students in the psychology of sustainability the other day, is the perception that is, well, here's what I need to say is that we have to just simply look at if any people are marginalized, through environmental racism and so on, that's just something that must be addressed no matter where this is. Like, for example, a lot of people do not understand, I know most of you in this room do not understand that some of the most impoverished people in this country are the whites of Appalachia. Between the total political chicanery that has taken their economic system almost apart from coal, and now they're exposed to fracking. They have more carcinogens in their water than is Port Arthur, Texas, in the air. I mean, it's just really unbelievable what's happened in that area. So we can find environmental racism or environmental injustice anywhere, and anywhere it's happening, it's connected to the same systems that are causing it anywhere to anybody. And that's why I just think that that like an ecological equity or environment or ecological democracy is something that we can develop malleable models for anywhere that are needed anywhere to do. Food democracy plugs into this, of course, very much so. So anyway, I think I saw a lot of heads nodding and everything. Does anyone want to talk a bit more about these? Dr. Kamal?
I actually, I don't know if you're going to be disappointed or happy with that, but I did a study. I was commissioned by the Institute for Economic Development at the University of Texas to do a study on the impact of the fracking in one of the large shales in South Texas. Mm-hmm. In 2012, 13. And I was surprised because we did like a bunch of quantitative analysis, but also we met with communities. The royalty that goes into the community members, the influx of money that goes into their pockets from the fracking, unfortunately makes some of them kind of validate what's going on. I mean, regardless of the environmental impact, that was like one of the shocks of some of the feedback we got. And while actually the whole fracking thing skyrocketed the housing market, tripled the rent and the goods and services in even just the typical grocery stores like Publix, the equivalent there is called HEB. It was like three times the prices typically in the region. So people, some of the locals didn't care about how the other locals being impacted and including being pushed out because the landlords took advantage and prioritized the oil and gas workers. We even reported on some illegal kind of advertisement in the local newspaper of saying oil and gas workers only, which is against the fair housing law. Yes. Yeah. So and thank you for mentioning that too, Dr. Kamal. How Texas has managed that, or how the corporations in Texas that are fracking have managed that. Of course, it's managed differently in different places depending on what they can get away with, right? And so in the case of like Appalachia, apparently there's still a huge influx of money, but it's going to very few people. It's being channeled very differently, and they don't have the, if you will, there's not the political will in the population that you see in Texas. And Texas being characteristically an oil and gas production state, right? So they have different expectations, but no, that's a perfect example of what something like that is environmentally ruinous
does to society, whether it pumps up one sector of the society so much so and eradicates the rest, or it eradicates society in general, you know, and benefits a group of politicians. So right now, that's right on. I really appreciate that. Let's see. How about I move on to, this is something that you were interested in, is the role of fear and racism and the role of feeling holistic sustainability. It's bundled these up together. There's an area of research called, it's referred to as terror management theory, TMT. And it was actually came off of a sociologist and anthropologist, Ernest Becker's work, who came off of Otto Rank's study or lifetime of work on humanity's ever-present tension. Well, so Ernest Becker found that, said, okay, if there's an ever-present tension within each individual, within societal tension, so abundance, scarcity, love, hate, fear, courage, all these the ways that we look at the spectrum of the human experience in psychology, then what's energizing what moves somebody along this radio dial of fear and courage or abundance and scarcity? And he found that over his years of 40 years of research, he found that basically it's what do we do with the reality of our mortality? What is this? Why do we behave the way we do in certain ways and behave differently in other ways and so on? So that led to these three social psychologists about 45 years ago, 40 years ago for sure, to begin researching this scientifically. And then eventually would coin this as the terror management theory. It's been vetted as many times as most of the social science psychology theories, rather than are still the strongest, for like social cultural theory and so on. But at the heart of it, and that's what that tenet's about, at the heart of our behavior, best and worst and all points in between, is what we do with the reckoning with mortality. Do we keep it unconscious, or do we actually embrace it and say, I have a window of opportunity here. What am I going to do with it? And how do I reconcile this window of opportunity towards the end of it? That's an existential question. But anyway, this research showed that, and so I started connecting this with, and others have too. This is not my idea of connecting. Okay, what is mortality about? It's the loss of life, right? In essence, most people experience life as having something to do with the world as a whole, nature in general. And there's actually a couple of really good papers out now very recently that talk about how, like, the fear of mortality is actually the fear of recognizing our inextricable connection to nature. In other words, our support system, and recognizing that anything negative that happens with the natural system happens negatively for us eventually, if not immediately, depending on who we are and where we live, right? How much more so the marginalized populations in this world that just live in something that can look like hell. I mean, live in places where the sea level never will recede, places where the water and air are so polluted. I mean, I think about this every time I'm in India, what this is like. But going back into some of the social psychology science, plugging that back into, there's a tremendous amount of literature that indicates, doesn't point straight to it because it's not been that much done, on how fear affects racism. And this comes from if you've heard of a groupthink theory, I'm sure you have, some of you have heard of groupthink theory. This is about out-group antagonism and in-group affiliation. So in other words, if the other can be vilified or even dehumanized, whoever the other are, right, then this allows them to be separated from and treated less than a human, inhumanely. And at the base of that comes up from, it goes back into some of the literature about sacrificial religions. What can you do to do something to keep death away? You put them up on a tree, you put them at the top of a pyramid, you burn them, or something like that. Or if you can't quite find something like that, you become a master race and decide who is the outgroup that's going to be exterminated. Nazi Germany, right? This is all about the unconscious experience of mortality, the fear of death, and what we as a species do with it. On the flip side of that, terror management theorists and existential psychologists, researchers have found that when we say, okay, I have a gift and it's called my life, I'm going to do the best I can with it. The inclination then is so much higher to see others feel the same way. That plugs us back up into social value orientation and sustainability inclination. But that's just a cursory look at terror management theory and the role of fear. But some of my literature research on the behavior of our ancestors in the Fertile Crescent really holds this up pretty strongly. And that's something I'd love to talk with everyone more about. But that's my Fertile Crescent phenomenon concept that I use in teaching. Let's see. Ariel, I'm sorry, how are we doing on time? I think I've been talking a lot here.
We're good.
We okay?
Time. Yeah.
Okay, great. So, so the role of perception of place and social and environmental responsibility, I'm sure this plugs in really, really well with SVE. And you'll be glad to know that there's quite a bit, it's a growing area of interest in social psychology. Cognitive to some extent, but especially social psychology, and looking at how does a person recognize what their place is and how does that affect what they think they should be doing for it. And that with that comes what should they be doing on behalf of not just the lake that they live on or the farm they live on or the city sector, the neighborhood they live in or something like that, but how does it affect their sense of responsibility for the other living things there. I love this. I got one colleague, a new colleague in the psychology department that's working on this with one of his doc students. And I'm excited to be able to help with that or participate in their research. So it's promising and it's good. It's something that we can share that can facilitate transdisciplinary work, SBE psychology, for example, fisheries, water chemistry, hydrology, all those can go into this for a study. Okay, this is something that Ariel put together. I really love this way this is set up, is climate optimism. Okay, so in my research in positive psychology and teaching in it, there's a premise, and it's also supported in research in cognitive psychology as well, is that the straight line in the research shows that a pessimistic view, a negative view, nihilistic view even of something or of the current conditions is almost guaranteed. Let's say an R of 0.9, all right? It was almost guaranteed to bring that person to the worst of possible outcomes or fall far short of the best of outcomes. Flip this around, a focus, an honest optimism, a focus on what can be done, a recognition of strengths as much as of weaknesses, cultivates an optimism that cognitively opens, if you will, increases our cognitive bandwidth. So that we begin to process problems, the jagged problems, with more optimism and more dimension. It's very interesting. So climate skepticism isn't going to move us towards a climate change action. Climate optimism will move us towards this. From a psychologist's perspective, that's what we will do. Now, is it going to be easy? Heck no. Is it? It's really difficult. Are these things extraordinarily scary? And are we guaranteed that we can pull ourselves out of the pit of the worst of outcomes? I don't know. But certainly, if we focus on what we can do and we put these, we practice what I call our collective cognition. That's how we got to be a super species, right? Not because we were the fastest or the smartest or the strongest, because we had this collective cognition that we could master, being successful socially. So that's what the positive psychology for improvement of human health and happiness is. Positive psychology is used in education, also used in therapy, but it's also used in planning and as an organizational tool to help people focus on what will work, focus on the strengths, not ideologically, focus on know what the weaknesses are, but pull in our strengths to overcome the weaknesses. And this is one very effective way, it is indicated anyway, as an antidote of eco-anxiety and eco-fatigue. And it also can help us remedy environmental numbness, which is a theory of how we disconnect from the environment any way we can for two reasons. One, it's easier. Technology is always inviting us to tune away from the natural environment or to listen to our partners, listen to our friends and family as they talk. But it's also a good way to tune out what's going on in the background in our unconscious about what's happening to the planet and what's happening to other people. It's really the other way around. We think more about what's happening poorly for people before we think about the planet usually. And then this last point here is decolonizing our relationship with the natural environment. And this points back to ecological equity, environmental democracy, and how we do that. And actually, this is a positive feedback. These have reciprocal relationships to the extent that we become aware of our strengths, strengthen our strengths, our weaknesses actually, or our lesser strengths, if you will, our weaknesses actually begin to be less weak. It's counterintuitive in a way. You think, work on your weaknesses. Actually, if you actually work with your strengths, your weaknesses begin to draw up cognitively. And it's kind of multiple intelligence theory. It helps explain that. But the important part of it is that as we practice this, as we unify, we find our strengths, we use our strengths, we all have similar and dissimilar strengths. We pull those together, then our eco-anxiety and eco-fatigue can be reduced. And then we are more open to figuring out how we develop ecological equity. Okay, let's see, are we? Yeah, okay. That we went through a lot on that. I hope we have some time. I can stop sharing my screen, or I can flip back to some of the topic points, topic bullets, if you like, whatever anyone would like to do.
I would like to add to kind of make a comment on the last point. I apologize for my camera not being on. It is kind of broken on my laptop right now, but
okay, sure.
This
one?
Yes.
Okay.
I've noticed online on social media, I don't know if you guys are aware of TikTok. It's a very big platform for especially honestly, probably one of the most used in from ages 12 to honestly 25. The way the algorithm works is that the more you like something, the more it gets presented to you. And I've just noticed that the climate optimism might be underrated and one of the hardest things to actually change within our society. I've noticed a tendency of people who really care and have learned and been knowledgeable of all the different environmental problems throughout the globe is the nihilism is very prominent in all of these communities who actually care. It's to the point where it's a lot of people just feel very incapable to do anything. And I think that's really is what's bringing a lot of younger people who care down, is just the fact that there is very little climate optimism. There's very little legislation going through right now. And I think it's very important to combat that since it's not even a constructive solution in the first place.
Right. So that's thank you, Celeste. So that's a valuable point. And that, okay, so in media psychology, one of the things that comes out, especially in the context of environment, let's say climate change specifically, endangered species is another, is that, this is an old term, but, media sell copy. When they sell fight and fright, they sell disaster, right? It draws us in because it, at an unconscious level, this harkens back to our earliest ancestors, is we needed to focus most on the threat because the threat was the tiger that was walking behind us. We still carry some of that with us, although without really recognizing that, unfortunately, there are very few tigers left, but no matter, we forget that we have so much control over this. And that here's part of it in looking at the cognitive process. Typically in the media, and unfortunately in a lot of environmentally oriented classes, what doesn't matter if it's forestry or whatever, or fisheries or environmental science, 80% spent on the problem and 20% on what they refer to as the possible solutions. And they point to the models. Okay, well, this model indicates that this will happen in 5 years, 10, 15, and so on. Not once do they, in the science papers, in the classrooms, many classrooms, do they say, this will likely happen if we don't do anything differently, right? And if we only focus 20% on a possible solution, we'll not really get to doing something differently. I always say, think about this from a cognitive process, 80% on the problem, 20% on the solution. Don't worship the problem. Understand the problem, that's 20%. Focus our cognitive energy on intervention and action. You know, I saw this in limnology, I saw it in ecology, I saw it in fisheries, and I see it in sustainability. I don't know if you all see this now, but I see a constant stream of negativity about this, redefining and re-illustrating the problem that we already know exists with very little put out for the solution. Media do this. How many times have we been on TikTok or Facebook or Instagram or something like that, and there's just all these horrible images of what people have done to animals, right? Okay, we'll just flip that over, and there literally is 100 times the number of actions being taken to prevent that. You know, and so that's not being put out there. So everyone thinks, well, we're doomed to climate change because you saw that model. But we'll never get to a point where we respect non-human animal dignity, because didn't you see those images on TikTok or whatever the case may be? And that's, as you just mentioned, Celeste, that's disingenuous at a minimum. Okay, that's quite frankly, I think is criminal in a lot of ways. But it's up to us to bring out the possibility, and it's up to us to bring out the success stories and how those things were successful. Here's an anecdote. There were 4 huge national parks added to the national park list in India alone last year. 2 of them were ones that we've been working on. And I'm not saying they were national parks because of our work. We just contributed to the knowledge base that eventually led to those. But this is a place where, it should be easy as pie for us to create national parks right and left, and we have so much political resistance. But nevertheless, there are good things happening, even in places where people paint as being in a total chaos. That's good things for the environment. The people, the indigenous people around these national parks are benefiting too, because with national park protection, there are fewer poachers, there are fewer there's less trafficking of women and children. So an improvement of the protection of an area as a whole protects the people that live there too, not just the elephants and tigers and rhinos. I got off a little bit on a tangent on that, Celeste, but thank you for that. It's a very valuable comment. Anyone else?
Yeah, Dr. Chandler, I was just going to sort of chime in and talk about the climate optimism context here, and reinforce to all the SB students and guests that might be visiting with us the reason why we focus on the drawdown textbook as kind of this core central component of the program, is because it's fundamentally about the solutions. And some of them may not scale up and end up being the global solutions that we hope for, but they certainly are based on things that are working at some smaller scale today and have the capacity to be larger solutions, given the sort of political, social, cultural, ecological, sort of will to do so. And I also love that Paul Hawken and his collaborators frame the importance of the messaging and not to refer to this as a war, on climate change, and use sort of militaristic and negative terms, and not to sort of be victims and say, oh, poor us, climate change is this trauma happening to us. He frames it and says climate change is happening for us. It is the system that we're in that's giving us feedback and telling us that we're operating out of sync of the body that we live within. And I really love that, because it helps to sort of awaken us to this realization that that it's all just feedback, right? And then it also made me think of this. I'm getting close to addressing some of these concepts in the social and cultural sustainability class at this point in the term, but there's a great Hidden Brain podcast from Shankar Vedantam talking about, the podcast is called Radically Normal, and it's talking about the profound shift in America in acceptance of gay marriage, and that it's historically unprecedented. There's been no other social or cultural issue that has seen such dramatic change in such a short period of time. And so they kind of try to unpack why. And in there, he talks about, it kind of cross compares it to other civil and human rights issues, and talks about the importance of sort of, the very sort of conventional civil rights, civil disobedience, based on love and compassion approaches, and that ultimately those are the ones that tend to sort of win out, but that there is still this important role of sort of the agitating side that's really, vocal and trying to drive change. And so the examples in civil rights for African Americans would be sort of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. And that at the end of the day, Malcolm X had an important role, but Martin Luther King Jr.'s approach was the approach that drove more change, but it wouldn't have been possible if Malcolm X wasn't there to also agitate on a more dramatic side. And anyway, it's a great, I'm going to drop a couple links in here. It's a really great podcast. And I think it kind of fits and cross-pollinates with some of the things that you brought up.
Thanks, Dr. Knowles. Absolutely. And that's, those are very valuable anchor, right, sources.
Maya, you have your hand up.
Oh, yeah, hi, man.
Yeah, I just have a question. So I wanted to know, Dr. Chandler, like, what are your thoughts on animal agriculture or factory farming relating to the psychology of sustainability? Because I think they kind of relate, and especially to the theme of like eco versus ego, and how humans kind of just care more about themselves and rather than like other organisms, especially non-human animals.
Sure. Okay. Well, let's see let me try to answer the last part of your question. Okay. And then I'll go back to the first. And this comes up a lot. Obviously it does with the psychology of sustainability, and I'm sure within SBE too. And certainly when I have students that are at IFAS as well, they're struggling with these things. This is a classic example, I think, of the need for a transdisciplinary approach and the focus on the frame. If you just simply tell somebody that eats mammals, for example, or somebody that raises mammals to have them slaughtered, you tell them that they're evil, they're mean, they're polluting the planet, you're not going to get a lot of traction. It's a terror management theorist joke about, so you wanted to have a party and you invited the Grim Reaper to the cocktail session. I mean, what's going on with you? But so, so it's how we go about it. I know that you all probably have friends and family or colleagues, whomever, that might not really care about that, or perhaps are not really as sustainability oriented, especially, or even really ecologically thoughtful, but they have improved their diet and especially gotten away from processed mammal meat, and pigs and cows, for example, just because of the beef is a carcinogen. That's the health department is ready. It's classified as a carcinogen, even if it's organic. It doesn't matter because the kind of intermuscular fat and all these other things just, don't really matter that much. But it's just something that's not good to be eaten. So that's an approach to them, improving their health. So many people stop eating or go on a more plant-based diet when their doctor says, if you continue the way you're going to die. So we don't wait that long, right? But then there's this caring middle, to use Cynthia Barnett's concept, of people that there's so many ways to reach them. The economics of eating less meat might be better, but better health for their children. And then, of course, a lot of us think about how, and somebody has an exact figure in the room, I'm sure you do. But if everyone stopped eating meat, twice a week, it's equivalent of taking the cars off the road for 1 week. That's how much emissions come out of these combined feedlots, something like that. Not to mention the amount of food that could be fed to people, that fed to livestock in those ways. The drugs that are fed to them that are excreted in the water way back when I was doing fisheries work, we were starting to see some of the steroids and antibiotics show up in the coastal fish. There's so many ways to get information out without raising their fear bar, somebody's fear bar or resistance bar so high they shut down. And I think that's the thing to go. Maya, you probably have some data on this, but I forget what I read this recently, the percentage of people who have gotten to a certain point of primarily plant-based diets. It goes across the political spectrum, and even in the United States, it's going that way. So find out what's working and then continue to capitalize on that. I hope that kind of went back to the first in the middle. I hope did that help?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome, Maya. Thank you.
So we only have a few minutes left. So are there any final questions, comments, concerns?
I do have a question, not about like the content, but about the group, this group that is forming. I saw on the sign up sheet that there's another meeting going to be on sometime in October. I was just kind of wondering is it more like a question answer, like a discussion, just kind of like what the plan is for going forward?
So for that particular meeting, that's like our general body meeting. We usually have them monthly. So for October, we will be talking about Hispanic Heritage Month and like sustainability in Hispanic culture. So that will be more like a discussion-based meeting, but we do have some like service events planned in October too, which we'll be announcing on our Instagram, Facebook. We'll send out emails.
Thank you.
And Ariel, I want to say something too for you and for Daniela. What a great job you guys did. You thought about the topic, you're passionate about it, you're finding the right people. And even during COVID, I really thought like, how can you even pull that off? And you did it seamlessly. And that really evidence because of your passion about the topic and you want to tackle it and have a discussion like this that a lot of people don't want to talk about it. So it's a great job and you did fantastic. And thank you for everybody else who's supporting them and trying to be part of this. I think this is the second time you guys are meeting, but it's going to be really something maybe, it's not like everything else that other clubs you go to, but there are certain topics that everybody wants to talk about it, but they hesitant talking about it. So you can come here and just kind of talk about it. And obviously, Ron, for you just making it time and coming for this whole hour and sharing your experience and everything else, we are very grateful for everything you do for SBE.
Thank you, Dr. Armaghani.
One of them, and I hope you can stay like involved and you come across anything you can like share with the students group. And they have shown a great leadership and really moving this forward and organized and everything. So I'm very proud of you and proud of everybody else who's actually on this call. And I hope you can stay connected. And absolutely. I want to say thank you to Dr. Kamal and Hal, my friend, to say thank you for the support and thank you for attending. This means a lot to me, and I know it means a lot to our students to show them support for something new that they are tackling.
Thanks so much. It was great to see everyone. Dr. Knowles, it's super to see you again.
Absolutely, always, Dr. Chandler. We really appreciate all the ideas that you brought forward today.
You're welcome. And Dr. Kamal, it was good to meet you too. I'm sorry, what?
You guys are making me feel like uncomfortable. I am calling you by first name and then I didn't call you Dr. Chandler and Noel, and I'm just like, no. You guys are telling each other like, I don't know how to do that. I just by your name and I feel that close to you. So I'm glad I feel that way too.
And I go by Azza, by the way. I know it's hard to pronounce my first name.
Yeah, so, and I go by Hal. The students call me too.
Yes.
And you see my first name here. That's wrong.
Yes, and that's what I called you. Like in SBE, we're really close to each other. The students called me by my first name, and we just we're one, and we work together. We're all interested in something and topic that we're all passionate about, and it's the best place to be and space to be at SBE. So
I'm sure it is. Well, it's you all have created it. I am in an area that's a department that's a little bit more formal, but but it's good. But no, I love SBE. It's a great home for the students.
Well, thank you for all the mentoring that you have done for us. And I think Hal now he does the methods of inquiry before capstone, and probably there will be some student interested in these kind of topics too.
There definitely are. Absolutely. Yeah, very much so.
Great. I look forward to it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for coming. If there's no more questions or comments, you are free to enjoy the rest of your evening. I hope you have a beautiful week, and thank you all for making it out.
Very
so
good
much.
job.
Thank you.
Excellent. Very good.
Thank you.
Bye.
Very good. Bye-bye.
All right. Take
Have a
care.
great afternoon, everybody.